Do you have a typical property that has a lot of brush, tree trimmings, and other types of material, other types of woody material? Well, one of the things that we do is we turn that into charcoal. Hi, I'm Justin Hitt with Prosperity Homestead. Rather than throwing these materials out, we strip the straight pieces that we can use for garden stakes, and we turn the rest into charcoal in a barrel. Now, I know a lot of folks will make a pile and burn brush. They'll put it out on the curb for people to take away. We actually use a barrel with no holes in it, and we feed the barrel slowly, each layer suffocating the previous layer to make a very large, you can fill up the whole barrel charcoal. Now, it's not biochar until you've added some kind of inoculant. So what we use is that demo biodigester on the corner there. And ultimately, the charcoal material, we pound it a little bit to make it more of a dust or a powder. We basically sling it out over the garden over the growing season. Now, you can see this is my grass-fed garden. It is now April, and I'm about to put the fence back up. I'm probably going to put another layer of grass down as we start, turning compost and such. So you can see grass clippings. I'm letting them dry out over here. If you put these grass clippings on wet, they will clump up. So we dry them out a little bit. I get a lot of questions about the grass-fed garden, and a lot of people have been suggesting adding biochar to increase the carbon in the soil. Well, let me explain something first. You can turn all this brush into charcoal, and then that charcoal will actually absorb nitrogen and suck up nutrients out of the soil. You don't want that. You've got to inoculate the materials. So these materials have actually been soaking here for a little while. To put out the wood, you basically have to run water in it. You'll end up with a couple unburned pieces. But essentially, if you do not inoculate the charcoal, you'll basically be sucking the nutrients out of the soil. So it's going to store those nutrients like a battery, and then ultimately it'll degrade your garden. So you can see the chop and drop we've done with these basically these brassicas that are kind of into season. You can see we've layered out a few more beds. In past videos, you probably saw a pile of brush there. But essentially, what we're doing is we're mounding these materials to store the carbon in the soil by also reducing their volume. So this barrel, you get about an 80% efficiency if the barrel doesn't have any holes in it. But the barrel over time will degrade because it gets super hot. And you'll end up with holes. So as soon as you get holes, it'll burn everything out of the barrel. I think Rural King, I can get these barrels pretty cheap. But ultimately, this charcoal material is very brittle, light, very porous, but you've got to inoculate it. You can see where we poured pond water in it, and we poured the effluent from the biodigester in here. Another thing you can do is, if you have a composting toilet, is that you can use this charcoal in the composting toilet to reduce smell and odor, and then put it then over the cycle of your composting of the manures. It will reduce material. Another thing that I've seen that it's pretty useful is if you take all this brush. So I mound a lot of the brush up and burned some of it, but mostly mound it up. If you have goats or other types of ruminant animals, you can actually throw the brush, when you're cutting and pruning trees, throw the brush in with the goats, turn it into biochar after they've eaten all the leaves off of it, and then use this biochar in their bedding as a nutrient absorber. The biochar is very useful for under rabbits, so you can put it under the rabbit waste and let the rabbits pee on it and stuff, and that'll inoculate it. I put a lot of this charcoal into our composting, and that's actually a pretty dry compost pile there. I haven't done a really good job of managing the pile lately. We've got leaves and yard waste. I'll probably come out and do a project where we wet this down and turn it all over. But again, the grass-fed garden now has straw on it. I put waste straw on it. You don't see the previous straw. And now you might be saying, well, Justin, look, I see the biochar chunks. They're too big. That should be powdered. I personally don't want to stand here and grind this stuff down. And because I know these beds are never tilled and they're just constantly turned over. So this dirt you're seeing right here, by the way, came out of the path here. So I dig the path out, make it level. See how wide that bed is? and I throw it back up on here. If I end up with extra charcoal that I didn't get to inoculate, that like this, for example, I just throw it in the path and throw wood chips on top of it or something, or it'll get flooded, and then any new nitrogen that comes off the beds will go into the paths. Remember, our paths are high carbon materials. Can't get any more high carbon than charcoal, and you essentially, as those materials get stepped on, the next season they'll get flung back up on the beds. Now, what you'll notice here is a lot of this stuff's growing on the side here. This stuff you can actually put in tea. I forgot what it's called, but if not, see how easily everything comes out? It actually smells pretty good. Oh, look at that. I just threw it on the bed. I'm probably the laziest farmer in the world, or laziest gardener. But a lot of this exposed soil you see on here was basically dug out of the paths and thrown uphill. We always throw it uphill. And in that, you'll see some charcoal pieces, but you don't see all that grass that was in a very popular video of mine. I gotta get out here and mow this as well. But you don't see all the grass that was layered on here because it all decomposed. So for a permanent raised bed, we're adding grass, carbon material, and you notice there's not that much, there's not that much, there's weeds or anything. It's all on the edges. This is actually oregano. We want that to come up. But everything breaks down. I'm just gonna randomly pick a spot. It's pretty dry out here, and we're just gonna scrape this aside and show you. There's a rock. Got a little rock pile down there. Look at, whoa. Look at them little centipedes. But the soil down here is nice and cool. We're not quite at a point where we have soil warm enough to start putting plants out, but you can see the layers of material. There's some leaves there. The leaves don't break down as good. Okay, here you go. There's old biochar right there. Okay, so I dug a layer down, and you can see these little tiny pieces of charcoal, and they were actually inoculated, put into the soil, and you can see that quality soil, that beautiful, rich, moist soil, but it's under a layer of materials. So it's really difficult for weeds to come up, and we are adding charcoal, biochar, but we don't add a whole lot of it because we want to make sure it's properly inoculated, and that it is able to incorporate in the soil, because it's a small enough piece. A lot of times pouring the charcoal in your paths and stepping on it is okay, but it's always better to run it through a compost pile, run it through animal manures, so you're using it to reduce waste. And of course, if you have a composting toilet, you can use it in the composting toilet. But we want that material to be finer. We want it to be inoculated. Otherwise, it's just going to suck up nutrients, and we don't want it to suck up nutrients. Now, again, in our contour paths, we talk about this constantly. If you're at one of our training programs, if you're out at some demonstration garden, our contour paths are about slowing and soaking water, so it spreads out the water, soaks it in the ground. And if we want to reduce crop runoff, again, these beds are full of nutrients because we're composting in them, because we're adding and removing different types of animal wastes. You can catch that in the charcoal, and walking on basically charcoal and wood chips mixed, walking on that, it's going to crush this charcoal down even finer. And then at the end of the season, when you dig out the paths and throw them upslope, remember, water's going to take soil and nutrients downslope. We want to throw the soil upslope, so that we're kind of keeping our cycling going. The charcoal will then get incorporated, very nice. And I'm just going to randomly again, because I remember, I think I did a video down here where I had chopped and dropped all of the brassicas that were here. I think I had a lot of kale and cabbage and these mustard greens and stuff. I'm still eating these mustard greens, by the way. But I'm just going to randomly, let me get a stick. Let's get a little stick. And I know this looks a little messy and there's little sticks everywhere, but you know what? I might take this stick right here and I might just use it as a garden stake. So why, if it's nice and straight, why burn it? So, but basically I put this garden stake in here. I'm going to move this straw away. I'm taking my little stick and I'm digging in the soil, and you can see the perlite from a potted plant. So we put a, you know, we always start stuff in a greenhouse, or we start it inside. And then I'm literally gardening with a stick. No fancy tools required, nothing. But you can see here, I'm pulling up the soil. We got good looking soil, a little bit clay in this. Little tiny pieces of charcoal. That's best. Remember, biochar, there's a little bit right there. Biochar has a massive surface area, but again, we want it incorporated in the soil. The whole terra preta thing is that it's incorporated with the soil. The best way to do that is to run it through some sort of composting. But literally, come on guys, look at this. I got a stick, I'm holding the stupid phone, and I'm basically clearing out a little hole. You drop your plant in there, okay? And then you push the soil back around it, put the mulch back around it. There's very few weeds, if any. And then boom, you got it growing. I even put some honey locust in here just to see if I can get it to root, because under the ground here is so moist. Now you might be asking, well, in the wind, the straw is going to blow around. Well, that's why I throw sticks on it every so often to let them dry out. That's a honey locust tree. I don't know if you saw the previous video, but this honey locust tree was around back. It fell over on its own because of the method we use to manage these types of invasive trees. But again, it lays on the bed as it dries out, holding together the straw. You can see some chunks of charcoal. It's a little big. But again, it's not one thing that makes your garden grow abundant. It's observation, it's understanding ground covers, it's finding plants that maybe have come up where they don't want them. You can dig them up and move them around. It's the layering of materials rather than the constant tillage. It's selecting the right materials. Yes, I could turn those straight sticks over there into biochar, but I'm going to need them as the tomatoes and the larger plants come in. And sometimes it looks a little unruly because I've got piles of brush and composting materials. But again, we want to do things in cycles. I take the pile of brush was almost as tall as me. I took it, I burned it in a barrel. The barrel has to be level, by the way, so that because there's no holes in the bottom to get airflow. You have to feed it slowly, and the air gets sucked down from the top as it heats up and drafts. It causes a pyrolysis. It's basically a gasification of the wood, and you're now burning the gases and the wood itself. The exhaust from this is more of carbon dioxide and no volatiles because they're all burned in the barrel. Remember, it's a burning in a low oxygen environment. Once it gets full, you're going to add water to put it out, and then you're going to start pouring in it, peeing in it, mixing it with the manures, using it as a utility valve. You know, you could, right after it's done, you could actually use it as a water filter. But the key to understand here is if I just throw it's not biochar until it's inoculated. Ideally, if you use this material in animal bedding, it will get crushed by the animals, manured by the animals, and then when you clean out the bedding, simply turn it a couple times as compost, and it's done. So I see all these videos where people spend a lot of time and effort to make the biochar. I literally hung out here with the kid. We used a little sawhorse over there to cut everything down small enough that it just dropped into the barrel. As long as we're feeding it in layers and periodically smashing it down, the previous coals will be put out by the following fire. And because there's no oxygen, all the gases are going to be the fuel, not the wood. That's why we have such a high percentage of carbon. So again, if you have any questions about this or anything else we cover, I'm Justin Hitt from Prosperity Homestead, and you can visit us at www.prosperityhomestead.org. I'd love to answer your questions. I'd love to introduce you to different experts around my area who can help you in this. And I'm really going to concentrate more on getting this going because it's April and we're getting close to planting season. So I think I'm going to do a last swipe on this, cut some grass, and I'll give you some updates. But you can already see plants coming up. You can already see the soil has good moisture, and you can see that we're not only adding nutrients through the composting process that's happening on the beds, but we're also using charcoal or biochar as a battery to store those nutrients over time, so that anything we add to these beds stays in the bed, goes in the plants, is biologically available, and ultimately part of that cycle of nutrients that serves your family, that serves your better health. Thanks for watching.